Then on Sports Central, we go over a college football game preview and prediction on the Week 9 matchup between the Michigan State Spartans and the Michigan Wolverines. Huge matchup for both these teams coming up here in Week 9. You got Michigan State, who is 3-4 on the season. They have disappointed in this season to this point, but this is a huge opportunity for the Spartans. They take on Michigan, who is the 4th-ranked team in the country and still undefeated this season to this point. So this is a huge matchup for both these teams coming up here in Week 9. We'll be going over a full game preview and prediction on this match for today, starting with your team trends. Michigan State beat Wisconsin 34-28 in their Week 7 matchup. Both teams are coming off of byes heading into this matchup as well, something to keep in mind. But yeah, they beat Wisconsin 34-28 in double overtime. So, I mean, Wisconsin being a team that's also been a big disappointment this season. I mean, it doesn't really look like a quality win, but in the end, I mean, it's still a win for Michigan State team that is in desperate need of wins right now. And once again, they're 3-4 in the season, 1-3 in conference right now. And I mean, heading into that Wisconsin game, they were on a 4-game losing streak. So at least they have broken that streak since. Then for Michigan, they beat Penn State 41-17, dominated the Nittany Lions in that one. Penn State was ranked 10th in the nation going into that matchup, and Michigan had no problem defeating them in that one. They're once again 7-0 on the season. So Michigan still undefeated. The pressure is on. They're very much still in contention to win the Big Ten. I mean, you got Ohio State, who is receiving all the attention right now, but Michigan is, I mean, they're right up next to Ohio State right now. So, I mean, you can't underestimate the Wolverines. I mean, that's how it went last season. Michigan was kind of underestimated, and they ended up beating Ohio State and made it to the college football playoff. And that's very much a scenario that could happen this season as well. Definitely do not count out the Wolverines as of right now. Games beyond Saturday, October 29th in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So this is a game where Michigan is, I mean, they got the home field advantage. It's a nighttime atmosphere as well in prime time, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. So Michigan has got an advantage in that way, that's for sure. Spread's going Michigan by 22.5. So they are heavy favorites in this matchup by over 3 touchdowns. Over under 55. And the FPI is going Michigan as well, 90.2%. Series history of Michigan leads at 71-38. But Michigan State has won the past 2. Last year it was in East Lansing, and we did see Michigan State get the win, kind of a come-from-behind win, but it was a huge one for the Spartans there. And but in the end, Michigan does lead the overall series by over 30 matchups, and in the last 10, Michigan State leads it as they have won 6 out of the past 10. But overall, a pretty split series in recent history between these two teams. Stat comparison for this one, Michigan State is 69th in points per game, 62nd in points allowed. They are 61st in pass yards a game, 113th in rush yards a game. Isn't that a change from last season? This team with Kenneth Walker was, I mean, they were just so tough to stop on offense and in the backfield last season. And I think, quite honestly, I mean, he's had a much greater impact on this offense losing him than many expected. I mean, there's been just a gaping hole in the backfield ever since. And, I mean, Jalen Berger, he's the top rusher for this team, but he's only got 360 yards on the season and 5 touchdowns. He was the Wisconsin transfer running back. So, I mean, that's just unfortunate for Michigan State. I mean, when you have as good of a running back as Kenneth Walker was last season, I mean, he's obviously going to be a tough guy to replace, but I don't think many expected it was going to be this tough to replace him. But here we are, and this team is 113th in rush yards a game this season. Then for yards allowed, they are 106th in passing, 72nd in rushing. So defensively, not a great team this season to this point. And overall, I mean, this is just a downgraded version of last year's team. I mean, this is a team that is still very talented. They just have not looked anywhere near as good as they were last season. And as for Michigan, they have looked as good as they were last season. They are fifth in points per game right now, 3rd in points allowed. They are 69th in pass yards a game, 7th in rush yards a game, and for yards allowed, 6th in passing, 3rd in rushing. So this is a team that in almost every category is in the top 10 except for passing yards a game, where you got McNamara, who has been the primary starting quarterback, or was for the early parts of the season. Now that role is on to J.J. McCarthy, who definitely is the guy with higher upside, but also a lower floor. So I do think in the end it's the right decision to have McCarthy in there at quarterback, as his ceiling is higher, and I definitely think he shows potential for the future, even though you could say McNamara potentially has got more experience or is more consistent. But, I mean, if you're going to win big games, you got to throw McCarthy in there. So I'm all in support of that. But, I mean, overall, the rushing game has been very strong for Michigan as well. Don't forget about that. Blake Corum, He's got over 900 yards on the season and 13 touchdowns to this point. Your recent matchups, Michigan State, they beat Wisconsin 34-20, double overtime there. Lost to Ohio State the week before, 20-49, so they got beat up by the Buckeyes there. Lost to Michigan by a couple of touchdowns, lost to Minnesota 7-34, and lost to Washington way back when, 28-39. So there's your 4-game losing streak that Michigan State was on. This team was ranked pretty high, though, at the start of the season, and I mean, this team, they were hyped up, and rightfully so. Michigan, they beat Penn State 41-17, beat Indiana 31-10, beat Iowa 27-14, beat Maryland 34-27. So a couple of closer wins there against mediocre opponents. But I will say this, I mean, they dominated Iowa for a long time. So even though that game is within 13 points, I would still say Michigan was very dominant in that one, just because because I mean, in the end, Iowa did score a couple of touchdowns. But even that Indiana game, that's a game that was very close and shouldn't have been that close for a long time. Michigan did pull away in the second half, and Maryland was close all the way through. But turns out Maryland is a decent football team. They do have 6 wins on the season right now, so do not underestimate that. And, of course, if you look way back to week 3, they beat UConn 59-0. Your key points for this one, Michigan State 3-4. This team could be great, but once again, just a bit too inconsistent. And, I mean, this is a team that's still maybe not quite as complete of a team as they were last season, but I still think this team has got potential to be a great team. And so that's why I think, I mean, there is some optimism here for Michigan State in this matchup, is because we know this team is talented. We just haven't seen this team reach their full potential quite yet. This has just been a downgraded version of the team that we saw last season. So, I mean, they showed potential against Wisconsin, but in this matchup, going on the road, I will say this, in a night game, into a brutal environment in Ann Arbor, I mean, you're going to need to force turnovers and start quickly in this game. Keep it close from the start and potentially win this game in the later stages. And I think that's a possibility. I mean, you got Michigan State, and I mean, this is a matchup too. You can never rule anything out in a Michigan State game. We've seen some wild outcomes, some wild matchups in recent history between these two teams. I mean, you never know what can happen when Michigan and Michigan State face off against each other. And then for the Wolverines, coming off of a dominant win against Penn State, currently a dark horse national contender. I mean, this team is very much, I think, a real contender. I mean, I think, Michigan, this team is underestimated. You got Ohio State, who receives all the attention. But, do not forget about Michigan. That is for sure. And they have the home field advantage once again in night games. That's another thing that they do have going their way in this matchup. But that said, let's get to the prediction here for Michigan State and Michigan coming up here in Week 9. And I'm going to go with Michigan in this game. I will say that, but I will take them heavily as well. 42-17 is my predicted final score. I think Michigan, the way they played against Penn State, we really saw how good this team can be. And this team is, I mean, they still got a really high ceiling. I think Michigan in this matchup comes out, in a nighttime environment, coming off of a bye. I mean, Michigan State's coming off of a bye as well, but I think Michigan and this team is simply more talented than the Spartans are this season. So I'm going to go with Michigan and get the win 42-17. So I'm fairly confident Michigan wins this one. It's just a matter of whether or not Michigan State can keep it close. And in the end, I do have Michigan covering the spread, which is currently 22.5 points towards them. I just think Michigan State, this is just a team that has struggled. They've been inconsistent so far this season, and it just hasn't worked out for this team, especially on the road. But that said, once again, I'm going to take Michigan in this one, 42-17. I'll take the over as well on the points, which is currently 55. So anyway, that's it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this matchup, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.